Evening, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. We're just admitting everybody into the room at the moment. Thank you for joining us. Please mute your screens. And welcome. Bear with us one moment while we admit everybody into the room, the virtual room. Fantastic. Okay, right, I think we have everybody there now. Ladies and gentlemen, it's an absolute pleasure and a privilege tonight. I'm Paul Charney, Chairman of the Zionist Federation, for those of you who don't know me. It's an honor tonight to be able to present this interview with Omar Al-Busaidy on UAE, Israel and peace. A phenomenal discussion tonight with a phenomenal individual. We are here to try and bridge the gap, to try and understand what it means, not just for us, but for our cousins in the Middle East. The Abraham Accords. The Abraham Accords, quite rightly titled. We're starting to become closer with all our Middle Eastern friends. So tonight we have our esteemed guest, Mr. Omar Al-Basidi. I'm going to tell you a little bit about Omar. Omar, I hope you don't mind. A little bit about Omar. Omar is an entrepreneur, an author, and a futurist. He is also the very proud Emirati global shaper. He's a speaker at the World Economic Forum, member of the US and UAE Public Affairs Committee, and a member of the Arab Youth Pioneers Program. Omar's experience ranges professionally to include public and private sector organizations such as the Abu Dhabi Tourism and Cultural Authority, the Dubai Chamber of Commerce and Industry, the National Bank of Dubai, a lot of esteemed organizations here. Omar also served as commercial attaché in the UK at the British Embassy in London in 2007 for a year to 2008. Omar's passions lies in learning, entrepreneurship, futurism. Hence, since 2010, Omar has been invited to mentor students on entrepreneurship and leadership at several universities across Abu Dhabi. Moreover, has worked for organizations including the Khalifa Fund and the Abu Dhabi Council for Economic Development. I could keep going on. I could keep going about Omar, but I'm going to stop there because clearly Omar's reputation precedes him. I want to welcome all of you tonight, and most importantly, Omar, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a real pleasure. And can I ask you to present yourselves to all of our guests before we start today's interview?
Thank you so much, Paul. And thank you everybody for inviting me today. Dalia, who saw me at the other session with the Zionist Council of New South Wales. Steve, thank you so much for this. First of all, assalamu alaikum and shalom alaikum to everybody. Thank you all for joining in at this time. As Paul mentioned, my name is Omar Al-Busaidy, or in Arabic, Omar Al-Busaidy. I'm from the United Arab Emirates, born and bred in Dubai. For those of you who are in the UK as well, I just want to let you know that I'm a very proud Chelsea fan. So for any Chelsea fans out there, please, hats off to all of you because we're top of the table now. And also, I studied in a private school in the UAE. I went to a British curriculum school, so I did my O levels and my A levels back in Dubai. But now I'm actually I received the Fulbright scholarship, which is a well-known scholarship offered by the U.S. State Department since 1949, since after World War II. And I'm one of two people that received the scholarship. So I'm doing currently my master's in international affairs and intelligence at Florida State University. So I am in the US, but you can see I'm dressed in my national traditional outfit because I knew that I'm going to have to do sessions like this and also to sort of like exchange the culture. And I decided to wear this. And also, Paul didn't mention, I'm also an author. I published a book. It's called Just Read It. So I have a self-help motivational book, which I published a few years ago. And from the futurism side that Paul mentioned, I'm currently working on my second book, which is called Why Jobs Are for Robots and Life is for People. Thank you, Claire. I can see Claire Walford is is a Chelsea supporter in the chat. So, so just to, just to let you all know, one of the reasons why I've been very active with the Israeli and the Jewish community in terms of, the Abraham Accords, it was because I was actually in Washington, D.C. when the signing was happening. In fact, also, my brother-in-law, he works for Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed, who's the UAE foreign minister, who was there at the signing of the accords. This was a huge moment for all of us in the region. Frankly speaking, when, for us growing up in the UAE, I'm sure there's a lot of you out here in the group that probably already visited the UAE, like Paul. The UAE it's a melting pot of different nationalities, religions, etc. Like we've always, by the way, always had Jews living in the UAE, and I have a lot of Jewish friends in Dubai. There was only the question about Israelis and Israeli citizenship, but a lot of Israelis have different citizenships too, so they were always there anyways. So it wasn't like the government was targeting somebody, oh, if they were Israeli, they would tell them like to leave the country or not allowed to come in. They had a different passport. It's, this is what happens, and there's politics involved. We never had an issue as Emiratis with Israeli citizens or anything like that. There was just this whole question about the Palestinian question and everything else with what was going on the ground. And I think it was, as citizens, we don't go out and advocate anything, whether we should go for or against anything. It's basically the leadership and the government and what they see is best in terms of geopolitical situation. So when the government announced that we are going to have a normalization with Israel, for us as citizens, the way we respond to our government is since growing up, ever since growing up, the government always does everything for the interest of not only the, from a political perspective, but also for its citizens and for its people. So they thought, okay, you know what, why do we have to take this new generation of these young people into a dispute or conflict that they were never part of or anything like that? It did not make any more sense. And now with the way things are changing in the region, we notice that there's, first of all, first and foremost, Jews, as Paul mentioned, are our cousins. The closest, if you look at the Abrahamic religions between Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, they're the closest is between Muslims and Jews, because there's a lot of similarities. We don't eat pork, kosher, halal is the same. If I don't find a halal restaurant, I go to a kosher restaurant. There's so many things, circumcision, all that things, they're all the same between the Jews and the Muslims. So, and now when they found that we have a common challenges as well, not only political, like with Iran, threatening both the existence of Israel as well as the Gulf region, we found that there's lots of commonalities there. And the other commonalities as well is, you look at Israel and some of the environmental issues that they face, whether it was with water and food, etc. So the same technologies that Israel has developed and innovated can be useful to the UAE. When it comes to healthcare and education as well, we commend what Israel has done when it comes to those fields. And hopefully this is why we're already working on the COVID vaccine together as well between Israel and the UAE. So we found that there's a lot of opportunities where we can work together and address a lot of common issues. And we just needed to put an end to a chapter that kind of didn't really make sense, that it existed all this time. And we still respect the Palestinians, and we have a lot of Palestinians that live in the UAE and everything else, but we do and now have come to realize the Palestinian leadership. So there's a difference between, again, the leadership and the people. And it's even with Iran. I have a lot of Iranian friends, but the leadership in that country is ridiculous. So when we got to see the two-faced reality of the Palestinian leadership, our government was woke, as they say, and they decided that, now we need to turn this page and build new alliances. And it's, I think, you can see in the news, like literally there's just droves of Israeli politicians and people flying to the UAE. Like it's crazy how you can see the excitement between the two sides. And currently myself, I'm a part of so many different organizations, like the UAE Israeli Business Council. In Israel, there's an organization called Israel Is. And then now they've also established UAE Is. So I'm part of this youth group between Israelis and the UAE. Although I don't know if I'm any youthful because I've got all this white beard now and I'm like almost 35. So yeah, I mean, it's been great so far, and I'm here to answer any questions that you may have.
That's fantastic, Omar. I think that you've already answered a lot of questions that people might have to ask, but I'm going to expand on a few things. First of all, I'd like to add one more detail, which I think we share in common. Israel and Dubai share in common. There is an old Jewish joke that Moses roamed the desert and found the one place that there isn't oil in the Middle East. It's an old Jewish joke. And Israel has not had its natural resources to rely on for its economy, and so had to rely on its people. And I think Dubai is in a similar circumstance where it doesn't have oil to rely on, and therefore it's relying on the human resource, on the people to create for the wealth and the economy of the country.
100%, Paul. And you know, I love using this quote by Albert Einstein. And he said, you know, the economies or the nations that will be successful in the 21st century are going to be knowledge-based economies. And clearly, like you said, not resource. Dubai, the country, the United Arab Emirates, has 7 emirates. So you have Abu Dhabi, the capital, Dubai, Sharjah, Ajman, Ras Al Khaimah, Al-Quwain, and Fujairah. I'll try to write them down somewhere so you guys can remember that. But yeah, Dubai, which is the commercial capital of the UAE, does not have any natural resources. And where Dubai was able to position itself today where it is by building upon different economies, like the, you know, that they have the logistics. You know, Dubai is one of the biggest, or I think the second or the third largest re-export hub in the world. One of the busiest airports in the world, etc. Of course, now some of those numbers are different because of COVID and everything else. But before COVID, these were the numbers. And yeah, I think there's a lot of exchange in ideas and possibilities between Israel and the UAE, and that's why you're going to see a lot of announcements coming up very soon.
The opportunities are endless, and that's the beauty of the mind.
Absolutely.
Omar, let me ask you a little more specifically about the deal. So in Dubai, and in the Emiratis, in all of the Emiratis, in Sharjah, Ras Al Khaimah, Ajman, when it was announced that UAE would be normalizing ties with Israel, what was it like, the mood on the ground? What were people saying? Because just in Israel, everyone was celebrating.
Yeah.
There was one person, I mean, as you know, like with the Arabs, the Jews, everyone's got 2 opinions and everyone's arguing over the 2 opinions.
Yeah.
But this was the one issue which everybody agreed and everyone was happy to continue. What was it like in the UAE?
You know, in the UAE, I'll tell you, there's 2 sides to this. There are some people that were shocked because it came out of nowhere. Like, you know, everybody is dealing with COVID. COVID was the major sort of like point of discussion. But I personally, me and my circle, we were not that surprised. And I'll tell you why. The reason is, first of all, as you mentioned, Paul, in my introduction, is that I worked in a lot of government departments. And we actually signed a lot of deals with Israeli companies, like big Israeli companies, for a long time. Like I'm telling you, it's more than a decade ago, like more than 15 years, 20 years almost. And most of the deals were around security and also some logistics and stuff like this. And it just wasn't open. And I think this is what a lot of like media outlets were also highlighting, that this was a relationship that was under the covers, and now we just exposed it to the rest of the world. So for people like myself, I wasn't very surprised. And also, you have to remember, 2 years ago or 3 years ago, the UAE did announce that Israel was going to take part at the Expo 2020 that's supposed to be taking place in Dubai this year, but due to COVID, it was pushed on next year. So Israel was going to have a massive pavilion to showcase what they were doing when it comes to innovation, mobility, and transportation. So this was already there. And also, as you may have known as well, there's been a lot of different Israeli ministers that visited the UAE, speaking at conferences in the UAE as well. Israeli athletes, whether they were taking part at jiu-jitsu judo, etc., which is something that we again have a lot of commonalities with Israel. So it wasn't really that much of a surprise. It was just a question of when, not if. So so when it happened, when the deal was announced, a lot of people were excited. And like I said, Paul, the UAE already we have people from all over the world. Like literally, there are countries you probably never heard of like frequently, or you know of, but you just don't hear of. And as diverse as it is in the UK, it's the same way in the UAE. So now we finally can put up another flag of a country that we have normalization with. I mean, look, Iran, for example, yes, we do disagree on a lot of things, and we just want them to stop interference in the Middle East region and in Arab affairs and everything else. But we do still trade with them. They have an embassy. We still trade with them. We're literally not at war, unless there's some people will argue a proxy war like with Yemen or something else. But we still have there's a political relationship. So it did not make sense that not to have a political relationship with Israel either. For me, the only time I met my Israeli friends is whenever I was going down to Ibiza or like to Mykonos. But we have the same taste of music, let's say, okay, or whatever. But I would always meet them anyways. It didn't tell us, the government didn't say, when you meet an Israeli, don't talk to them. It was never like that. But, I think what happened is, for a long time, Paul, the narrative, when you look at the news and you see the things that were happening on the ground, and for me, the reason why it didn't really affect me 100% when you see like members of the IDF, there was conflict between two sides, etc., with the Palestinians. It didn't affect me too much because for me, I've always remembered that in conflict, you need to see two sides of the story. So till today, for example, I have my opinions about Fox News, but I still watch Fox News. So in the UK, I read the Daily Mail. Awkwardly, I do. But at the same time, I still read the rest of the other ones. Like, I want to see two sides of every side. Like, you have left and right, right? There's left, right, and sometimes center. Even in Israel, you read the Jerusalem Post and you read the Haaretz, and it gives you two different narratives, right? So for me, I was always, and I think the government as well, we always sort of keep an open mind to getting different sides of the story. And now it's been easier for us to accept this progress and this and the Abraham Accords. And I think it's working really well for everyone. It's been easy for everybody else to absorb in the country because we've always had that sort of attitude.
Yes. I mean, to add again another example to the two sides, in Israel, we read Al Jazeera in English, and then we read Al Jazeera in Arabic.
There you go.
Two different sides.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Because when I read Al Jazeera in English, to be honest, like I would tell this to a lot of people, I actually did enjoy certain programs on Al Jazeera English. I mean, I know it's banned back in the UAE now, but there are actually some programs and some reporting I thought was pretty cool. But then, you read Al Jazeera Arabic and you watch Al Jazeera Arabic and you're like, oh my God, we need to shut down this station. I mean, they're really inciting like hate and everything else.
Crazy. We like to see what's going on. So, I mean, it sounds very similar. As you say, the educated in the world all already knew what was going on and already knew much of each other's culture. I think in Israel, most people are slightly concerned that when the Israelis en masse come and visit Dubai, it's such a different culture. Israelis have a thing called chutzpah.
I know the chutzpah.
And we're worried that maybe we might offend a few people. So please forgive us if we do offend. It's just the culture. But when you come to Israel, free to say what you like.
Yeah, Paul, I love that you mentioned the chutzpah. And, right now I have spoken in so many different platforms, particularly because one of the things that a lot of Israelis want to do now with this opportunity that opened the doors in the UAE is they want to do a lot of business with them, right? With people in the UAE, etc., and the rest of the Gulf, even with Bahrain. But I told them, listen, guys, it's not like every government institution or every other Emirati businessman is sitting over there with a blank book of a checkbook. They're waiting to just sign deals, just like that. I mean, my recommendation is actually, I have a suggestion to two sides, to the Emirati and also to the Israelis. And tell the Israelis, look, I love the chutzpah. I think it's great. the one thing about Emiratis and the Gulf and Arabs in general, like we love building relationships. Like for us, the reason we like to do that, and when we build a relationship, we like to know more about you, etc. And you know, you'll have to do a couple of visits, and we want to come and visit you as well. And a lot of them are opening their doors to their homes. Like many Israelis are actually going to Emirati homes. The reason we do that is we want you to trust us and who we are, and vice versa. And why we do that is because we don't want it to be transactional. We don't want it to just be one deal. Why don't we do deals all the time? But we just traditionally like to do business with people that we trust. And mostly they're like our friends. It becomes very different because then we can be open with each other and then we don't take offense. But also, Paul, I do tell Emiratis that, listen, because a lot of Israelis do have the chutzpah, and this is traditionally how they've been doing business. And maybe the reason they've been doing business in this form is because when Jews were in Europe, they were persecuted in Europe, they were persecuted in different parts of the world, etc. So they've always felt like they need to quickly do the deal and protect and stay protected with their culture and their people because they were sort of persecuted that way. So for them, they also have a sort of mistrust as well. And also with given how many years there was no relations, so they do feel that too. So we have to extend ourselves to them, and just as they have to extend themselves a little bit towards us. We have to find a middle ground somewhere, because honestly, it can be sometimes very annoying to do business with people in the Gulf, because they take their own sweet time, especially when they get to know people. They like to drink coffee, and they'll feed you, and they'll eat, and they'll talk about, I could sit over here, talk about Chelsea all day long and sing all the Chelsea chants I can, because I'm a massive supporter since I was like a kid, but I don't want to do that. So I've learned to kind of like assimilate and to try to find a middle ground between two peoples. And this was what I've always been doing. Like when you mentioned that I worked at the British Embassy, my job was to work with the British business people and tell them culturally how to do business in the UAE. Just because they're smiling and they're happy and whatever, and they seem excited, doesn't mean that they want to sign a deal. They're just happy with what you're doing, but they still want to get to know you. So I would always kind of give this advice to people. And this is my advice to all the Israelis who are tuning in right now.
Well, that's fantastic. We're looking forward to one of our big stadiums in Israel being renamed the Emirates.
Oh, I can't wait.
We'll see what happens. Omar, so culturally, I think we've covered, I think we understand, and that's going to take time. And I think you mentioned the key word is trust, and trust will come after building relationships. Absolutely. And it'll come after time, and that will take its time. But I think everyone's got the goodwill to make that happen. Let's turn the topic to politics now, a little bit of politics.
Sure.
Let's talk about the Palestinian issue, because that's been one of the key sticking point with any normalization and peace with Israel around the world to all Muslim and Arab countries. Again, Jews and Israelis tend to argue with ourselves what we're doing is right or wrong, but we have a problem with going to understand the other side, your point of view of how you see the things. And what I'd like to do is to gaze through your eyes how Emiratis and how you see the conflict. Because obviously we think, we're doing what we can and we're struggling with another side. We don't think we're right in everything. Israel does not do everything 100% right. Nobody says that. And everyone argues what's right and what's wrong. But we are frustrated with the Palestinians with peace over many, many times. And how we view it is that we've tried to make peace, a serious peace, 5 or 6 times. There have been opportunities, whether it's Ehud Barak at Camp David, whether it's Rabin before that with Perez, with Arafat, whether it's Ehud Olmert, and recently. But again, that's us looking at ourselves and saying, well, we tried. Tell us how you guys see it and how you see things as they are on the ground.
Yeah. So, like I said, Paul, when we talked about the different news channels, like what they show, there'll be this side, there'll be this side.
Yes.
It's the same as when you watch CNN and it'll tell you what happens on the ground. I mean, so, I like that quote once by Denzel Washington. He said, if you watch the news, you're misinformed. If you don't watch the news, you're uninformed. So one of the two. So look, for us, first of all, it's not let's start with Palestine. The reason why, for obviously, I'm sure all of you know, the reason why it's a very contentious issue is because of one main thing, which is the holy site in Jerusalem. So everybody knows this. The Masjid al-Aqsa, the Al-Aqsa Mosque, is one of the most holiest places for Muslims all around the world. So that's actually the main part. Now, what happened around the area? Because people knew, okay, fine. Back in the time, there was State of Palestine, and I don't know, whatever. And then suddenly things changed. And then when you see, or when it was shown to us, like how these Palestinians that were there, everybody was living together, and then suddenly they're not living over there. They were either like, you would see like images of houses that were demolished, so it was this or whatever. So this is what I think got a lot of people emotional when they saw this. They were like, okay, suddenly there's people who are living there, and then this is what they see. So this was the image that was shown to a lot of people in the Gulf since we were kids. This is like, I'm telling you, as I'm sure all of you know, that this is what probably I think all over the world it was there. Yeah. So then, okay, if this was happening, and although in other countries, there were conflicts, by the way, like in other Gulf countries, there were conflicts, and not even Gulf, I mean, all over the world. What prevented further escalation of sort of like, whether it was settlements or anything happening? What was the thing that controlled everything? It was negotiation and diplomacy. And as you just mentioned, Paul, there was many different Israeli leaders that put deals on the table, but they were brushed away. And even we know where even Yasser Arafat, which a lot of people respected and everything else. However, even he pushed away a lot of different deals. There was a very famous video of him just like walking away, where he wouldn't want to accept a new reality or a deal or something where, fine, okay, listen, this is the deal. This is what's being offered now by Israelis, and let's accept it and benefit the people. But I think they were trying to benefit themselves from a political perspective and saving themselves, and all the billions that were being sent by other countries, whether it was from the US, the Gulf countries, etc., the rest of the world. You're like, where the hell did all this money go? So now, because when you keep seeing, like, listen, the Palestinians who were suffering from the lack of strong political leadership, and the way the corruption is rife amongst their political elites, this is unfortunately what they got. So we said, you know what, we have to make this deal with Israel, and other countries need to come on board, because hopefully this time we could maybe play a bigger role in trying to find a deal for everybody, so everybody can be happy, and we put this solution in that part between Israelis and Palestinians once and for all. If we could do that. But the priority for us as Emiratis right now, we're like, listen, we have common interests between the Israelis and the UAE and the Emiratis, and this is what we want to focus on. So the priority is us. The second priority is the Palestinian question and everything else. If it is a two-state solution, if it is a one-state solution, whatever happens, basically a solution for these human beings to exist and just have just basic rights, which is, education, healthcare, and the rest of everything else. If they have a solution to that, then fine. But for us right now, we're focused on our borders and our people, and that's what we this is what we're doing right now. And I think we made a great step, a great move.
Well, that's fantastic. I mean, I think the UAE can play a big part in helping potentially bridge the gap between Israel and the Palestinians as well. And it might be seen as a more neutral broker between the two. However, whereas I think Israel would probably accept the UAE or Dubai or Abu Dhabi as a broker, I'm not sure the Palestinians would now accept Dubai and the UAE's broker. And I think for us, it's surprising for us to see how the Palestinians have reacted to the normalization and the peace. And what is the feeling in the UAE about the Palestinian reaction?
I love, Paul, that you said that the UAE could play as a broker. And look, if you've noticed, one of the biggest deals that we did last year was between Ethiopia and Eritrea. For 20 years, they were not talking to each other for 20 years. And we finally brought the two of them together. The Ethiopian Prime Minister received the Nobel Prize and everything else. They signed the deal in Abu Dhabi, if you remember, that happened. So yes, I think that we've developed our diplomatic skills to get to that level and be respected as a strong regional and global player when it comes to these deals. And I think when we were the first country to announce normalization with Israel, again, we proved that we can be that change maker. So now I think with the Palestinian leadership, it's funny you say this, because you know what? They just recently sent back their ambassadors to the countries in Bahrain and the UAE. The ambassadors that were actually being paid a salary from our government, not from their government. And anyways, you know what? We're still, you know what? If we were that nasty, we probably wouldn't let them back anyways, but we still did. So we're showing them, listen, you know what? We're still forgiving. And yeah, you have said certain things, which was very, diplomatic and everything else, but we're still going to accept it and let bygones be bygones. And now we're hoping that after, I think maybe for the Palestinians, they're hoping that the Biden presidency might influence, hoping to put a deal together. And we will also work with the Biden presidency. You know, we've announced our support for him as well. Biden was in the UAE, and he has a very strong relationship also with Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed in Abu Dhabi. So maybe we can turn the things around. I mean, Trump was great for all of us, and we loved him. But maybe Biden, with a little bit of, you know, the narrative would be a little bit less, let's say, harsher than Trump, if that's the right word, and we can come to a deal. I hope we can. I really hope we can just turn this page around and focus on other things that are way important in the world right now.
Omar, what's good to hear as well, and I think it's important in an issue like this, is to focus on the big issues, the main priority, getting a holistic peace. We tend, as people, generally around the world, to focus on the minutiae, on the small arguments, the small details. You did this, they did this, we did this, he did this, and we never get anywhere. And I think that was one of the frustrations with Israel, which is why normalization with the UAE is, despite right, wrong, yes, no, we're moving forward, we're progressing with peace, we're progressing with normalization, and that's where we want to see the Palestinians come with. Let me ask you a question. Do you think the current leadership, Palestinian, and the current Israeli leadership are the right leadership to be able to create a peace or not?
You know, it's a good question, Paul, but also there's two ways to answer this, because, you know, they say that saying, if there's a will, there's a way. So whoever is sitting there, if they have the will, they're going to make it possible. So there is that part. However, to answer the question again, if that's not in them at all, there's no will, whether it is, you know, Bibi or Mahmoud Abbas, then you know what? We need to see a new blood to come in from both sides, and then hopefully they will be the ones that would make the deal. But I feel like in the end of the day, people have the ability to learn. Like, you know, there's that quote, it says something about, you know, if you want to be successful in the future, you have to unlearn, learn, and relearn, right? So if maybe they both want to unlearn everything, whatever has been going on all this time, and have a fresh page and bring a neutral player, maybe like the UAE or anyone else, Bahrain, etc., and then say, okay, fine, you know what? Let's try to find a solution somewhere, because there is no problem without a solution. It's only will. This is 100%, like my mom always told me this since I was a kid. If God closes one door, he won't close one door before he opens another. So we just have to find the other door. And it's always worked for me.
That's fantastic. Omar, you mentioned potentially, if these are not the current leaders that are capable of making peace, maybe the next generation. And one of the frustrations we have in Israel is we are hoping for a next generation. Leaving Israel aside, but from the Palestinian perspective, the next generation is key. We waited from Arafat to Mahmoud Abbas things improved very slightly, but still no deal. And we're hoping for the next generation of Palestinians to be ready to commit to a deal. But the big frustration is the education in the Palestinian authorities. It's a big deal because we deal with a lot of the textbooks that we see, and the textbooks are very highly derogatory against, but they don't mention Israel, they mention Yahud. It's about Jews, and Jews are bad, the Jews are wrong, and Jews are this, and Jews are that, and you've heard all of them before. And this is the problem with, if you educate the next generation to be that negative, then we're just never going to see peace. Have you seen that yourself? And could I ask you, in the rest of the Arab world, is the education about Yahud quite negative or not at all?
I love that question, Paul. First of all, let me tell you this. The strongest book for me is the Quran. And in the Quran, there's a whole chapter called Bani Israel. Right. Second thing, it also says in the Quran that for a Muslim, the only other two people you can marry is a Christian or a Jew. Right. So if God says in the Quran that the only other two religions you can marry is a Christian or a Jew, then I think that answers your question. So that's the holiest of all books. Right. Now, in the UAE, we've never had access to those kind of books, even when the relations were never there. We never said anything like that. And we have very strong laws against discrimination, anything xenophobic, anti-Semitic, anything that's, if Paul, you know what, I'll tell you something. Obviously, everybody here probably knows that the UAE is majority Sunni, Muslim Sunni. And there's a lot of issues between Sunnis and Shias in a lot of different pockets and people and stuff like that. If I say anything against a Shia Muslim, because by the way, there are Emiratis who are, some of them are Shia. If I say something about Shias, I would get into a lot of trouble. I would get into a lot of trouble just for that. I would be sent to jail, and I have, it's almost $100,000 fine. So jail for 3 years and that fine. So we say this about any sect, any religion, you get into a lot of trouble. And I didn't see the question, but I think there's a question. Even the imams in the mosque, you can't say this against, they're not allowed to say something against certain religions or people or anything like that either. Anyone who did say, so there were incidences where somebody would say, they immediately take them out of their position and they would fine them as well and penalize them too. So you do have pockets of this happening, and they've completely changed the narrative. It used to happen also in Saudi Arabia, but also Saudi Arabia, there was, it was very popular because there's one of the biggest imams there who's called Abdurrahman As-Sudais. And he gave a whole lecture or sermon the other day, every Friday, about Jews and the relationship between Jews and Muslims. By the way, I want to tell you this, we obviously, as Muslims, we follow Prophet Muhammad. Prophet Muhammad as our leader, right? And Prophet Muhammad, one of his wives was Jewish. He married Sarah. Her name was Sarah. He married a Christian, Maria. I mean, she converted to Islam, but she was Christian, and he also married a Jew. So, there's who can say anything about Jews when we already have it so embedded in our religion to begin with. So a lot of people don't know this, and I like to communicate all this information. And by the way, as FYI, this is why they are our cousins, and there's so many things that is the same.
Fantastic. I mean, I think that's right, and I think the human element, the human rights element, the universal liberal ideals are going to be the same across the world, and it's just about respect each other and each other's positions and each other's religions, and it's about being human. And I think that's fantastic. Let me ask you now a little bit more on global politics. Sure. The Gulf Cooperation Council, the GCC, are a big conglomerate, big important union. They get together and discuss many issues, not just oil, but all other issues as well. Who do you see in the GCC as potentially being next to sign a deal with Israel for normalization? And who do you see definitely is not going to happen? Because you understand the mentalities of all of them a lot better than we do. So would you enlighten us?
I do believe strongly that a big contender is Oman.
Right.
Obviously, Bibi's been there twice. Everybody knows, like Oman's always been very neutral on a lot of different issues in the Gulf region. And everybody's putting their money on Oman, thinking that, Oman might be the one. Saudi Arabia, I can tell you one thing. The intention is very clear. They do want to. Like, they would do it yesterday if they could. But Saudi Arabia, the biggest challenge is they have a humongous population. They're the biggest population in the GCC. And unfortunately, I think there's still a lot of people that they need to, it'll be very difficult for the leadership to work around it with this whole issue. If the two-state solution or the solution for the Palestinian is not met, it'll be very difficult. But they have said it so many times that, look, the moment you do the deal, we will normalize the deal just like this. So it's actually really, really close. I almost feel like, like Israel needs to try to work really hard. The Israeli leadership needs to work really hard and quick just to try to find a solution around this. I don't know how and why is it very difficult there. I mean, I know the Knesset is not easy there. Every time I see these, I watch shows, like I watch the British Parliament. I love watching the British Parliament and see the arguments happening there. The same as the Knesset. I can imagine it's not easy for Israeli politicians that are maybe pro finding a solution and others who are not. And so, but if they did, I mean, you have no idea, Paul, and to everybody else, what potential opportunities you're opening. You're opening the doors to, like, it's just, it'll be huge. It'll be huge opportunities. Yeah. But I mean, I'm just an innocent bystander. I'm just here, a student all the way in Florida. I can't really, like, my voice is not that strong, but that's the potential, Paul. If after Oman, I think after Oman, I can tell you Qatar. I feel Qatar and Oman are kind of like right there with each other. But Saudi Arabia is who you really, really need. And you have no idea how much potential there is right there.
So I'm going to come back to Qatar in one moment. But one of the major issues that Israel has with ceding territory is they are worried, and it's an issue that you and us are dealing with. They're worried about Iran being on the border. Iran have virtually colonized Syria, have Hezbollah in Lebanon, have supported Hamas in the south, in Gaza, and are surrounding Israel. Do you see? And the problem with every time Israel gives land away, then Iran jumps in and holds it. If we can deal, I think, with the Iran issue and neutralize that as a threat, I think it'll be a lot easier. Israel will feel a lot safer to be able to go ahead with a lot of peace in that sense. So you're right, it comes back to Iran again, Iran being the catalyst for a lot of the problems in the Middle East.
100%. Look, Paul, I'll tell you one thing. I'm not sure if we have any Mossad agents here, okay? But I keep reaching out to Mossad on social media. I don't know if that's a smart idea or not, but
it's fine.
I keep telling you guys, please, I mean, why is it so difficult to take those guys out? Like, just as, I mean, there's a handful of them. Just take the 5 of them. I don't know how many of this. You must have a way, guys. I mean, I'm sure you do. But like, just save us from this headache.
There was Israeli Mossad. Do you remember the tennis players in Dubai?
Yeah.
In the lifts. It's not that they're not doing anything.
Send them there. I mean, you're taking out all these scientists. Why are you not taking out the head of the snake? You're just taking out the tail. Like, take out the head of the snake and we're done.
No comment.
Okay, fine. Any Mossad agents, please, like if it was me, I would, I could help, but I don't know. I don't have any access there. But anyways, so Paul, you're right. I mean, it is an issue. I understand when you concede, but this is why I don't think it's either or, Paul, that you just give up the land and you give up, the some of the territories that were, whether with Lebanon or with Syria, but there has to be another sort of a stronger political force. Like, I feel the Israelis, they worked really well in so many different fields. Well, in security, you have one of the strongest agents in the world. I mean, I told you, my degree is in intelligence, so I'm learning a lot about Mossad, and I have tons of books here. Anyways, I'm learning about, you have, in terms of security, in terms of defense, in terms of innovation, techies, and everybody else. But there needs to be a group of people, like you need to have a strong political force that goes in and starts working on that whole part of diplomacy, and you infiltrate those countries, particularly from a political perspective, because we sort of manage with some of the countries, but other countries like Lebanon, I think the longer, you know what they say, Paul, a problem is like cancer. The longer you keep it or ignore it, the worse it gets, right? And this is what happened, I believe, with both Syria and Lebanon. We kind of like ignored them, like fine, I think we were just like happy with the border, the demarcation or whatever, but we ignored what was happening politically, I think. And this is what I think, President Macron is trying to do. I mean, maybe it's a tad bit late for him, but still, he's still trying to go himself physically and try to influence the political situation in Lebanon. And I think the Israeli government should still try to do the same, to avoid and to prevent Iranian infiltration into those countries' politics. And this is the reason why the UAE and Saudi Arabia got into this war with Yemen, because we're trying to avoid Iran being right at the next door with Saudi Arabia, and also in Bahrain. I mean, you saw how when we sent the Gulf Shield Force and the way we infiltrated that country, so they're really that close. So this is what we have to do now. We have to we have to work much stronger politically.
Omar, I'm going to come to two other players in the Middle East, which are influential and in some sense agitators of Israel. And one is Qatar and the other is Turkey. And I'd like your opinion on both. Qatar has in the past financially supported Hamas and the armaments and the rockets coming out of there. It also has its prominent Al Jazeera, which uses as its own propaganda arm, etc. So Qatar has always been an issue. It would be wonderful if it could make peace, but how does the UAE see Qatar as a player, especially when it comes to Iran? And then secondly, could I ask you about Turkey? Turkey is very difficult. Erdogan has been a very difficult player in the Middle East and an agitator for the whole of the Middle East. And I'd like to hear your opinion on Erdogan and Turkey.
I'll start with Qatar. Qatar, Paul, one of the things that I'm not sure if everybody knows, but Qatar's behavior and the way that this immature behavior has been going on for a long time. It wasn't something that started 2017. We've had issues with them in the 90s, even way before that. By the way, just to let you know, I'm not sure if you're aware, but the United Arab Emirates was actually going to include Bahrain and Qatar as well. It was going to be 9 Emirates. They were going to be Emirates of the UAE, but they pulled out or maybe influenced by the British, because the Brits were always involved in a lot of things anyways, okay? But anyways, my point is, this is just to let you know, and actually, by the way, there was a currency between Dubai and Qatar. Before the UAE was established, there was actually a common currency between the two. That's how big it was, their relationship. However, the Al Thani family, and by the way, Qatar was ruled by Al Khalifa before Al Thani.
Wow.
Yeah, so it actually, that's why there's also this huge issue between Bahrain and Qatar for a long time, because the Al Khalifa and Bahrainis believe that these Al Thani, it was a tribe in the Gulf region. It was a tribe known to be just like thieves and liars. I'm sorry, but that's actually the truth. And it's almost like in their DNA. If something is in their DNA, you almost can't do anything about it. Maybe there's no hope with that. And this is the reason why they continue to still propagate lies through their news channel, and also backstab their partners in the rest of the regions by working with people like Hamas in Iran and Turkey. And this is the reason why we boycotted them, because we're trying to get them back in line, because there was no other way. Like what we're doing now, what we've been doing for the last 3 years, we've never done that to Qatar before. Like not to this level. The furthest we've done is maybe we just withdrew our ambassadors back in 2014 or something, but not to this level. Because the problem is, Paul, every time they actually do sign, they sign, they're there, they sign with the Gulf and say, okay, you know what? We promise not to be naughty anymore. They continue their bad behavior. It's like one of those bullies, like you don't know what to do with them. Like you put them in detention and they still come back and do the same thing. So how we deal with them, I still do not know. And hopefully what measures we've taken was able to punish them, and hopefully we'll never get them back again to the same path, because I heard there's news about them coming back again, with the relationship to normalize again with Qatar, but we'll see what happens with that. Now, Turkey, we've seen since Erdogan was emboldened with when they developed Turkey and was doing really well, the economy was doing well. I was actually proud of Erdogan, to be honest. In the beginning, I thought, okay, he did a good job with building the economy because it was down in tatters. But then they brought it back together. And then since he built the economy, first thing he said is like, he actually withdrew from the idea of joining the EU. He was like, actually, it's not a really good idea for us to be part of the EU. And I think there again, when he got that sort of like rejection from the European Union, which I think they made a huge mistake, it kind of gave him this idea that, you know what, like, fine, I don't have to be part of the EU to be strong. We could be strong on our own. And this is why even though they're part of NATO, they didn't care getting out of the F-35 program when they got the S-400 program from Russia, and violating every single norm from being a member of NATO. So now they're just trying to extend, you can see, their power and influence in North Africa and with the Gulf region, because they feel like it is their time to come back into the Ottoman era, and they're playing all these different Ottoman sort of like narrative in their in digital diplomacy and their media and everything else, trying to ring the bells of like a crusade or some sort of a thing again, all over again. Like he's trying to go back in the past. But obviously the rest of us are not going to allow him to get to that point. As you can see, Saudi Arabia formally banned import of goods from Turkey. So you know what, Paul? I mean, this is how we view Turkey's behavior and Qatar and Iran. This is the new axis of evil for all of us. And of course, war is not the answer. And I think the leadership is working really hard, and especially after this pandemic, they'll work even harder to try to get everybody properly aligned and hopefully get people to like not interfere in the region's business.
I think that's right, and I think it's quite evident for us as well in Israel to see exactly what Turkey is as an agitator and Qatar is as well, and it's difficult to trust. The other thing I wanted to ask you, there's another question that one of our members have asked, and that's regarding the United Nations. The United Nations for Israel has always been a very sticky point. It started in the 70s because there was the Cold War bloc of the US and the Western democracies against Russia and the East. And then everyone kind of decided in these blocs and voted against each other in big blocs. Israel always got caught in the middle. That you always had every time that this bloc wanted to try and harm the US or the democracies, it would focus against Israel. And that's how this whole thing started. And what you would have is this majority of 90% of these countries all voting against Israel and bringing up resolutions and voting. And this has continued, especially with the Palestinian conflict, as using it as a political tool. And pretty much resolution after resolution after resolution, to the extent that if we believed all the resolutions, then 80 to 90% of all human rights abuses in the world happen in Israel. All resolutions that happen against Israel. I don't know how you guys view the United Nations and all that, but I know Israel could do with another friend, potentially even abstaining. When do you think the UAE would be able to start assisting maybe Israel in certain resolutions? Obviously, if it feels it does wrong, that's fine, but it's pretty much anything Israel does is always voted against. So what's your view in that?
Paul, it's a great question. And I think right now, the UAE and Israel, they're already signing agreements in so many different fields. And I think one of the reason that when you do it, you know, the UAE is trying to use commercial diplomacy and cultural diplomacy. Like, for example, you have the first Israeli soccer player, football player. I'm not going to say soccer. I mean, they're talking to the British. So they have the first Israeli football player playing in Al Nassr club in Dubai, and so on and so forth. There's music groups as well. I think that through these agreements, we will see eye to eye on a lot of different things that is beyond the sphere of what we currently see ourselves, whether it's in trade and in commercial and everything else. The political relationship, I believe, will begin the moment we see Mohammed bin Zayed in Israel or we see Bibi in the UAE.
Right.
When that starts, I think a whole new chapter will begin, because there is where you're going to see a lot of MOUs in agreements in a lot of different topics. Because I believe Israel will be able to support the UAE in a lot of different international negotiations and different international, and you know, because the UAE has still its ambitions to be a stronger player in the UN, particularly the UN Security Council, and also with NATO and with other, you know, you have the G8, and other institutions as well, and I think this is where you will find the support between the two countries come to fruition very soon. So this is what I sort of understand and what I can see so far, and I think when it comes to resolutions in the UN regarding with Israel and everything else, the UAE now, especially with what happened when we announced the normalization deals, their tone will definitely be different.
Right. Well, that's fantastic to hear. Omar, I'm going to ask you one more question from the crowd, if that's all right.
No, you can ask me. By the way, did we answer all the questions? Because I mean, there's
there's a whole bunch. I mean,
there's a whole bunch of questions. I don't want to, I want to answer all of them. I don't mind. I told you, I'm all yours. If people can say it's great. If they can't, it's okay.
Let me ask you, how does the UAE view Biden's potential re-entering the J-Pac agreement, the Iran agreement with Iran? How do you view it? Because I assume, you know, Israel wouldn't be happy for that to happen, to pretty much allow Iran to get nuclear weapons. What is your view?
I know that the country is definitely not happy, but the one thing that we did say, and I think what everybody said in the region, Bahraini government has a main announcement, and also the Saudi government, is they take the people in the Gulf and everybody's interests who's going to be affected with into account, because that's not what happened the first time the deal was done. So they need to put us on the table, including with Israel, and we determine what and how this should be taken forward, because all this time since that deal happened, we were dealing with the Iranian threat. It was as real as ever. I mean, we never got attacked like this, before, where the Houthis attempted to attack Abu Dhabi airport. You have also the oil facilities with Aramco in Saudi Arabia. So the threat now is real and dangerous. So now the only way that we would be okay with this discussion, at least, is that we're on the table. It's either we're on the table or forget it.
Right. Well, I know Israel views that with much trepidation, and if Biden were to enter another agreement, it has to be renegotiated. We know we can't trust Iran, because Iran, in any event, didn't meet the original agreement terms. So that would be a difficulty for us. Omar, do you know of any other politicians or senior ministers any figures in the UAE that have visited Israel and come back and reported back yet? I know there was a journalist from the Khalij Times. Have you heard of reports of people coming back and telling what they've seen in Israel?
I mean, I have a friend of mine whose name is Ahmed bin Sulaim. Ahmed bin Sulaim, he is the chairman of the Dubai Multi-Commodity Center, which is a huge diamond exchange hub, and also coffee. And Ahmed, I mean, his interviews on social media, you can see it on Instagram, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. He's had very, very positive things to say about Israel and his experience over there. So the Dubai Diamond Exchange is opening an office in Tel Aviv. So they open an office over there as well. In fact, I mean, I spoke at the 37th World Diamond Congress. This was like a few years ago, and I think half of Israel was at that event, because I spoke to the largest Jewish community in front of me in my life, because there were hundreds of them, and I was invited as a keynote speaker. So no, Ahmed had a lot of good things to say about his experience, and all my friends, I have a group of people who are going from the UAE Israeli Business Council. So the Emirati delegation is going on the 26th and 27th of December. So we have to do another session, Paul, and I'll tell you what they said.
Oh, well, listen, fantastic. I'll be visiting Dubai, hopefully, please God, next Thursday. I'll be flying over, so I'm going to have a look at it again. I haven't been for many years, but it's going under a different atmosphere. And from what I understand, kosher food is readily available now.
Everywhere, yeah. It's always been, by the way, for anybody who's wanted to do, who want to have kosher food. We always had kosher food on Emirates Airlines, even Etihad. It was always there. If you ever travel, Emirates, any destination you go to, not just if you're going to Israel, it's always there. Kosher food's always there. So, but yeah, I mean, kosher food in the UAE now. So, Paul, yeah, I mean, I can't wait for you to go and try it. And you got to tell me, is it kosher, or is it like
kosher-ish, Jewish? Well, hopefully, please go one day, Omar, you and I can share a coffee, a gawa in Dubai, and then maybe one in Jerusalem or Tel Aviv, wherever you want to. And it would be a wonderful honor for us to be able to take you, to be with you there. And it sounds like we're all on the same page, and there are only good things to come. There will be trials and tests with our relationship. There will be security issues that Israel will have to meet, and Israel will feel justified, and the rest of the world might not. But I think through the inspiration of what you're saying, through dialogue, through speaking, through bridging those gaps slowly and properly, through trust, not rushing to anything, I think is inspirational to the rest and gives us a lot of hope. And hope is certainly what's needed. And this normalization, we know it was, trust me, we know it was a lot more difficult for the UAE to normalize ties with Israel than it was for Israel to normalize ties with you. We all know that, and we are truly grateful. We thank you for that. And we hope to be welcoming and to bring you into our hearts and to bring you into our homes. Despite our chutzpah, we hope that you will enjoy our time and enjoy our company. So Omar, go well, go in peace. Please God, we can all sit in face-to-face and have these discussions rather than via Zoom. And only peace for all people around the world and the Middle East. Omar, thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Thank you very much. May God bless you all, and shalom, everyone.
Shalom and salam alaikum, and to marhaba to everyone. I want to thank everybody that has joined us this evening. Thank you for staying in touch with the Zionist Federation. We will try to have Omar again. I can see so many people are elated, excited to have Omar. We'll definitely bring Omar again, and maybe we can have him here in the UK as well. Omar, you must let us know when you're in the UK. You must.
Absolutely. And Paul, please, you can share my details. They can follow me on my social media accounts. It's there. Whatever you want to give them my contact details. I'm cool.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I've been Paul Charney. You've been Omar Al-Basidi. Thank you so much to everyone who's joined, and have a good evening. Good night.
Take care. Bye, everyone. Good night.